Yeah, I'll do a bit of an intro to the society first.
Okay.
Stuff. Yeah, so thanks for coming. First of all, basically, like what is CUSP if you don't know? We're a society that is made up of scientists and anyone interested in policy, as we've already kind of went through. And yeah, we host lots of talks like this on health policy, environmental policy, basically anything where a scientist could go into government, have an influence, advise, and be involved in like policy making decisions. We'll have talks from those kinds of people and on those topics, but also careers talks. So a couple of weeks ago, we had a talk on DSET, so the Department of Science, Innovation and Technology, and they were talking about their journey through the civil service. They'd done a PhD and they hadn't actually done the fast stream, so it was impressive to see, an alternate route in there. So yeah, we have all these kinds of events, and you can probably follow our socials, get onto the mailing list and stuff like that if you want to learn more. On today's talk, we've got Professor Giles Yeo.
Talk is a very grand
discussion.
It's very grand.
Wilson, right, honorary president of the Dietetic Association, current research on broadly neuroscience, genes controlling, food intake, feeding behavior, appetite, body weight control, I guess nutrient partitioning, all of this kind of stuff. You've got a couple of books and a podcast I'm sure you'll want to mention as well. And yeah, the idea of this talk is like to have a really open discussion, questions from everyone after a bit of an intro. And yeah, Giles is a scientist, but we can ask questions on policy as well, and I'm sure you're happy to give an opinion on that, even if it's not authority. And yeah, let's just see where it goes. Yeah, cool.
Thank you so much, guys. So thank you for having me. I think, Jacob, I got people asking. It was in the part of biochemistry that
yes.
You meant. Okay, right. Thing, assuming it's recording and doing and it's shared. So I'm just going to give about 10 minutes, I hope, setting the scene. So I'm an obesity scientist, geneticist by trade. So I've actually looked at the genetics of body weight. We'll get to that in a second, but the genetics of body weight is, by its very definition, the genetics of how our brain influences feeding behavior. But this is not that talk. It's going to be, I'm setting the scene. I'm not going to be delving into the science, because in very many ways, this is not about the science, about the policy. Just in terms of where this most of this quote unquote presentation came from, it was a couple and actually got me thinking about it, which is why when you asked, I said, you know what, I'll do it. I was asked, I forgot when this was. This must have been 2023. So the election, the UK election, not other tragic elections, was last year, I think, right? So this was probably a year and a half before it was coming into. It must have been coming into Christmas of 2022. So I'm not a policy wonk, okay? And I got asked by a policy wonk. I don't know if you guys know Dame Teresa Monteau, who is the head of the Human Behavioral Unit thing, and she studies human behavior. She sticks barcodes onto shopping trolleys, and she understands millions of our behavior when we walk through Tesco's and where we would stop, stuff like that. Okay, and she studies these behaviors in a number of different perspectives. I understand. I know her because of her work in feeding behavior, but she works on cessation of smoking, how to reduce people from drinking, portion sizes, that kind of behavior. So she is, and she's a dame, and so she does speak a lot to government and together with the MRCF unit. But I got a call from her and says, look, we are speaking to at the time, the shadow team putting together the obesity, the Labour shadow team putting together the obesity strategy for a potential new government. And even going into 2022, it was already quite clear, okay, that we were about to shift governments. And so they were just kind of moving around at the moment. It was all people, I think probably only slightly older than you. So these were the very, very smart people who were getting together notes to brief the various West Streeting, as it turns out, West Streeting's team. And he was at the time already the person on there. What was interesting to me was I said, well, why are we speaking? No, not the government. Why are we also not speaking to the government team? Why are we only speaking to the shadow team, which is not a problem because they're now in government? And the interesting comment that I got back in response was they don't want to speak to us. I said, oh, okay, well, that maybe should tell us everything we need to know. So this was formed part, it was a half-day briefing in one of the colleges somewhere. There were a lot of policy things, and I was there to give the biology. And this first part of it was what exactly I told in the book. You can debate how useful it was based on what we're actually getting at the moment policy-wise, but let me do this, and then we'll get into whatever policy discussions we're gonna have. So obesity, setting the scene. These are the new, I'm not gonna tell you about how the drugs work, but I think they're worth the while discussion because I think they're crucial in the discussion about what we do about it. So this is Mounjaro, which is tirzepatide, and this is Wegovy, which is semaglutide, and this is obviously a family with obesity. So look, okay, just to set the scene, this is the report from the Lancet that came out beginning of 2024, so just a year ago. So the most up-to-date data we actually have. 1 in 8 people in the world now have obesity, but it's unevenly spread. Okay, now this is obesity just in terms of a BMI body weight scenario, rather than whether or not someone is ill. We won't go there in terms of the science, how you can be heavier and healthier and how you can be lighter. That's not the point. Okay, so on a just BMI basis, 1 in 8 in the world, but it's completely uneven. And we'll just focus on the country. In the States, it is 1 in 3 with obesity. In the UK, it is 1 in 4, closer, with nipping at the tails. Okay, so it really is quite unevenly distributed. In some of the countries, famously, and then there are also differences in prevalence between women and men, but only because women tend to store more fat than men. So it's an imperfect way of actually doing it. It's common. It's the point. Okay, problem number 1. Now let's focus in on the. So this is rates in men and women since 1993, and you can see the rise. And then what happens here is, and then let's move to children. Okay, and you can see that these are rates in children age 10 since 2026, and we've now segmented it into the severity of the obesity that's in question: severely obese, and obese or overweight. You can see that this is from 2006 to 2021, and you can see the inexorable rise, slowly, and then there's a quick uptick. Now, this little uptick here is the COVID uptick, okay, so it's real, all right, where people says, oh, yeah, you can move, it's my crap, just put it down, don't worry about it. It's my stuff, just put it down. Yeah, thank you. So that's the COVID uptick. So it's a real thing, okay, for now, this is the thing which obesity rising, and we can debate the causes, which we will, but this is the thing, to me, is always the most troubling thing of all. Now, we won't segment the population in terms of severity of obesity. Let's segment the population in terms of socioeconomic status, all right? And so now what we are now looking at is the bottom, not decile, the bottom 20% socioeconomically in this country versus the top, okay? And you can see that, first of all, most deprived, least deprived, but I'm just going to show you the top numbers, okay? Look at year 6, so kids leaving primary school, 12 years old, I think 11 years old, something like that, going into situations. So in most of our households, I think the bottom 20% is relatively really quite low in this context. 13.5 levels of obesity, 35.5% levels of obesity. That's bad. Okay, that's not a great thing. But look what happens in the bottom 20%, 31%. It's more than twice, okay, the rates of obesity in the poorest in society. There is no genetic difference between rich and poor. It's an accident of birth. So what the hell is going on here, in which actually, before we even introduce a single drug to the system, why is there this stark difference? And these differences remain. And the main problem is if you actually have kids with obesity become adults with obesity, unhealthy kids become unhealthy adults. It's very difficult to become unobese the moment you actually start life in a poorer state. And we can see here that poverty plays a huge driving role and therefore puts people at all the disadvantages that we know about. There are huge health disadvantages here as well. So this is the figure that troubles me the most. Okay, I have to say. So what are the consequences of obesity? So what is bad about obesity? It might seem obvious. I don't know. So there are issues with gravity. Okay, so size it makes a problem. Your knees have an issue. If there's a lot of fat around you, you have issues with sleep apnea. So this is where you can't breathe properly, for example, which leads to hypoxia, which you don't want because that's bad for your brain, lack of oxygen. There arthritis, difficulty with mobility, which means that you don't go to the gym as much or walk as much, and these are the things. But this is seldom. Apnea does get you into hospital, but this is seldom what puts you in hospital or kills you or kills people. The problem are the host of related illnesses, so-called comorbidities. I've just listed some of them here in order of almost of prevalence. Type 2 diabetes. So 85% of people with type 2 diabetes rather than type 1 will have obesity. Heart disease, not all heart disease is linked to obesity, but many forms of heart disease are. High blood pressure, once again, not all forms, but many. Certain cancers, and there's Alzheimer's, there's any number of different things that then comes down. So this is what kills you. This is what gets us into the hospital. This is what costs the NHS money. Now we look at the NHS. Here's Public Health England, and we look at this is direct spends, direct cash on dealing with obesity, whatever it is. You walk into a clinic, you walk into the hospital, they treat you. Okay, that's 6 billion per annum. Okay, we're talking about here. This is the wider societal cost. This is what happens if because you're too large, because you're in hospital, you now cannot get to work, you now can't get your kid to school, you can't get the broader societal is 27 billion. It costs a lot of money. Okay, in terms of that. And as you can see here, we spend more each year on the treatment of obesity and diabetes than we do on the police, fire service, and the judicial system combined. Okay, the only thing that we spend more on are bullets, and they're about to spend more on bullets. This is not the time to discuss bullets. Okay, but anyway, this is what we're actually talking about here. Now, what has driven up rates of obesity? Okay, so I am a geneticist. But our genes have not driven up the rates of obesity because our genes haven't changed, okay? So undoubtedly, it's changes in the environment that have driven up the rates of obesity. Now this, I've divided it almost into 3 components. I think there are probably more. There's the changes in behavior, just generally, we are not coal miners anymore. We sit on our arse more with the kind of work we do. We have dishwashers, washing machines, things like that. There's the built environment. It's more difficult to walk. I mean, it's easier here in Cambridge, but blah, blah, blah. And the food environment. Okay, and this is obviously the most obvious ones. And this undoubtedly has driven up the rates of obesity, that inexorable rise which I've shown you. But there are genes involved, okay? And certainly data from twin studies, this is where we get a lot of our genetic data from. So you have monozygotic twins, identical twins who are genetic clones of each other, and you have dizygotic twins, non-identical twins who would share as much genetic material as you would with your own siblings or your parents, so 50%. So if you study a large enough cohort of twins, tens of thousands of twin pairs, you're then able to ask any given traits, we're talking about obesity here or specific diseases, what happens when you share 100% of genetic material versus 50%, okay? And so from there, if you do the maths there, you can then work out what we call heritability. This is not an individual score. It's not like 70% of my body weight is down to my genes, but at a population level, when you look at tens of thousands of twin pairs, then what is the variation between identical twins compared to non-identical twins, the body weight, for example? And you can then work out the variation of that. And from the 100% versus 50%, if you're good at maths, you're then able to work out the heritability score, which is roughly 70%. So just to give you an perspective, the heritability of height, which no one would debate has a genetic influence, is around the 80 to 85% mark. So it certainly approaches that. Okay, so these are the genes. So why am I studying genes if I've just told you that it is the environment that's actually driving the situation? Okay, so because that is where the variation goes. So all of us are exposed, roughly speaking, to the same environment, at least in these quintiles of socioeconomic class. But yet, if we take a look at the top quintile, there's still people who are skinny and there's still people who are fat, okay, in terms of responding to the same environment. Fewer fat people, yes, but nonetheless, there's still a range of body weight. It's this range of body weight that the biology actually okay? So, and as I said, the genetics of body weight, we now understand to be the biology of the brain influencing feeding behavior. So ultimately, this is the point. Obesity and the prevalence we see today is a consequence of those with susceptible genes meeting a permissive, be it risky, unhealthy, fill in your adjective that you want there, environment. Okay? Now, crucially, the lower down the socioeconomic ladder, the more permissive the environment. And this could be because of where they tend to put fast food shops. It could be because of because at the moment, certainly in this country, unhealthy food is cheaper than actual healthy, less processed foods. And so if you are working 2 minimum wage jobs, you're more likely to, you're interested in feeding your kids. And so you have to feed your kids, and that's what life, you lack choices ultimately. And so the more permissive the environment, thus the prevalence of obesity nearly twice in the poorest in society. And ultimately, when you're lacking choice because you lack cash, obviously, you lack time because you're working 2 minimum wage jobs to feed your kids, you lack the knowledge, what is high in fiber, what is high in iodine, what is high in vitamin C, I don't know, whatever, right? So there is a knowledge element to it. How do I cook a lentil to make it tasty? You know, there's all kinds of questions you actually have. And the lower down the ladder you go, the less opportunity you have to get more information because you have less time and because you have less money, and ultimately you have less choice. Okay, so what money gets us is not happiness, it's choice. Choice gives us happiness. I think it's so. My last thought, okay, before we then open the floor to any kind of questions that you want to talk about. How about these new drugs? Okay, and part of what I do is to study how the drugs actually interact with our brain. I'm a neuroendocrinologist. That is my interest, and we've heard a lot about it. They do work, but are they the solution to obesity? Have we cured it? Have we solved obesity? I've got colleagues of mine who think that the obesity is just a matter of time, that these class of drugs will solve the problem. I'm more skeptical about that. Okay, couple of reasons why. These are drugs. Okay. And so they do come with side effects. I think they're relatively few compared to everything else. They're very powerful, and so they work. The downside is they're very powerful, and so they work no matter what your starting weight is. They work if you are a 350-pound man looking to lose 100 pounds. Perfect, designed for you. Okay. They'll also work if you are a 16-year-old girl weighing 65 pounds. It doesn't matter your starting weight. These drugs are so powerful, they'll stop you eating because they make you feel full. So that's an issue. So we need to make sure that we have right gating, that the drugs reach the right people, that reach right now. And ultimately, policy wants, it doesn't prevent obesity. It's a drug. A drug is designed to treat a disease, not to prevent a disease. So I think, what do we need to do to prevent a disease? We still ultimately need policy. And policy requires governments, and that is what's going to prevent the obesity. So we need the right tool for the job. We need to treat obesity because we have so much obesity, I've just pointed out. And so use a screwdriver for a screw, a hammer for a nail, the right tool for the job. Okay, just because it won't prevent obesity doesn't mean it won't help a large percentage of people. But ultimately, we have to go back and prevent the obesity to begin with. There'll always be some people with obesity, fine. Okay, and we can sort this out. But I think there's a vast majority of obesity that could be prevented if tackled at the right time. And it has to be tackled on a societal level. It can't be personal responsibility, largely because of our susceptible genes. Okay, if you have as I said, susceptible genes exposed to a risky environment. If the environment is always risky, then you're never going to do it unless you have something tonic like a drug acting on it. Whereas to sustainably solve it, we need to then crack the environment. So this is the way that I view how we kind of tackle obesity. It's not a one-size-fits-all. This is obviously, these lines are not lines, they're gray, they're shaded. But broadly speaking, we need to, when we look at obesity, look probably at the severity. And I don't mean just body weight, I also mean that severity for body weight for disease. Okay, some people can be skinnier, like I said, and have disease. Other people can be larger and healthier. So body weight divided by disease, almost, if we look at that. I think at the most severe end, 350-pound, 400-pound person that needs to lose weight pretty quickly, otherwise it's existential, all right? I think surgery is still the answer. And surgery is still the answer because it's quick, you lose weight quickly, and it's the closest thing we have to a cure, which means that it's permanent, okay, when you do. I mean, there's some weight regain, but it is pretty much permanent because you've replumbed your guts. Now, that's probably going to be the most extreme. I'm not countenancing rolling out to the whole population because it's a major surgery that's replumbing your guts. Now, then we have hair. Okay, my wife thinks I should lose a stone. Don't judge me, but I probably do. No one's going to give me Ozempic. Okay, and I would fit under the behavioral chain, whatever that might be. It could be I need to go to the gym more. It could be I need to change my diet. It could be both. It could be whatever. Okay, and I think it could be Weight Watchers. It could be whatever. There's a whole lot of things that we fit under the behavioral category where we still, I think it still has a place, and I think people still need to still be there. There's a huge gap between needing to lose a few pounds and needing to lose, 150 pounds, and that's where these drugs sit that we can then utilize in order to actually solve obesity. But this is a treatment rather than the prevention of obesity. So that is my piece. That is my 20 minutes. I'm sorry. So that is my piece. I'm going to sit down if you don't mind, and I am very delighted and happy to open the floor to any. I'll answer biology questions if you want as well, just from it. But let's try and focus on the you guys are policy, most of you policy type interests. So let's tackle that. So I'm happy to open the floor to any questions that you might have. And I'll always state what I know, and I'll tell you if I know it, and I'll tell you when I'm stating my opinion. That's always the rule. Yes.
I've seen in kind of like general media rather than like sciencey stuff that very often when people go onto the drugs, kind of Wegovy, Ozempic, those sorts of things, that it then suppresses your natural expression of those drugs. And so when people come off them, they're actually possibly more susceptible. And obviously the drugs are expensive. How do you think going forwards we'll manage that?
I don't know how much evidence there is. So if we tackle the first bit first, about the fact that you're taking a drug that you'll build some kind of resistance to, is what you're saying. I don't think that is true, at least not to date that I've seen any convincing evidence. The reason why I don't think that's the case is because so what are these drugs? These drugs are modified versions of natural gut hormones that we have. Every mouthful of food we eat, as it goes through the gut, out the inside, hormones. Okay, and so it's one of these is GLP-1 and the other one is GIP, and they are designed to be volatile. So what they're designed to do is to have this business up and down. It goes up, so it naturally will go up in us when we eat, and naturally when we go down. And so I don't think there will be any type of resistance. At least these drugs have been in use for more than 20 years. It's only the once weekly injection and the actual effect size that has really changed over the past few years. So I think that is probably, unless I'm proven wrong in the future, is likely to be the case. The second part of the question is
about whether or not we'll be able to keep using them.
Okay, so cost. I think the cost is a short-term problem. Now, reasons why. Competition. So obviously Ozempic, which is semaglutide, was the first to come online. I would say something like 2019 or so, 2020, something like that. And then Mounjaro, which is tirzepatide, then so Amgen, Boehringer. Okay, so competition will suppress the top of the cost. That's the thing, but it will suppress it only by a certain amount. The drugs will come off patent. Ozempic comes off patent in 2032. It is a long time away, but it's not that long a time away. It's 7 years away from now. We need to do something about it. But when it comes off patent in 2032, the price will drop a log scale. Suddenly it goes, at the moment, privately, here's the odd thing about these drugs, is that they're being, in a country in which we have an NHS, and I struggle to think of any other drug that is out there, bar paracetamol, okay, that we take, that the vast majority of people on these class of drugs are doing it privately. Okay, we can debate why this is the situation, but it is. It's roughly 150 quid to 200 quid a month based on it. So it's not cheap, but it's within the spending range of people within the top 30% of funding. The moment it drops to 15 quid a month, then it won't be actually that it's a huge change. Then we'll have real penetrance, I think, throughout the population. Yes, when it comes off, there'll always be richer people who want the shiniest stuff. I want the once monthly. I want the one where it makes me lose 25%, whatever, fine. But Ozempic will still work just as well, okay, when it's 15 quid than when it's 150 quid. So I think cost is a short-term issue. Okay. Yes, sir.
What about, quote, nanny state, unquote, interventions like free school meals, subsidizing healthy food, taxing unhealthy food.
Okay, so first of all, nanny state does annoy me as a term. Nanny state could be called government. I don't know. You know what have you. And I think ultimately, for a public health, for example, just give me some facetious examples. We all accept that we have to drive on a certain side of the road, and when the light goes red, we have to stop. We've accepted this, okay? And we all accept certain things in life. And public health, to me, is a very interesting thing, because and people don't like to discuss this, but it's true. It requires a certain loss of liberties, okay? So we're not libertarian. Well, okay, let me stop. I'm not a libertarian. I don't know what you guys are. But when we deal with public health of any variety, there needs to be a certain loss of liberties, because by definition, we're following a certain set of rules. Now, these liberties, when lost, need to be accepted by the majority of society, otherwise they won't work, okay, for that. And these liberties also, our ability or willingness to accept these laws is going to be culturally specific. And we have to accept that as well. Okay, depending on the country you come from, the culture you come from, these are going to change from country to country. And we have to accept this. So what are we willing to lose from a liberty front that we think will improve our health? The main issue is it's never politically expedient, ever, particularly for the people in government. And so it's always tough decisions, okay? And so taxations could work. My view is you can't tax something without making something cheaper, because we have to go always to the poorest in society. And ultimately, if Mrs. Smith, once again, is walking into a shop with a tenner, she has to feed her kids. And if you tax something, then now she's got to feed her kids less. Unacceptable. So if, however, you take tax that you do for something that's unhealthy, we can debate what that is, and put it onto healthier stuff, we can debate what that is. So ultimately, the bottom line is she still needs to feed her kids. And so she will be driven by price, okay? And so if you price appropriately, then you can make the default a healthier choice, just in general. Don't make it a choice. Now, look, I can't afford to pick and choose what I want to, what frozen food or McDonald's or whatever I'm going to do, or cook it myself, because I have choice. And we probably need to think about different things to make ourselves healthier. But I always think of the equity first. You go for the lowest and work lowest, in terms of socioeconomically, and then work your way up. When you have more choice, you have more levers. When you have less choice, then you just need to make sure that that is not a choice that you eat healthily, that is default that you eat healthily. So I think I didn't answer all the questions, but we have to accept, and it's got to be accepted within society. For example, we've now accepted that IVF broadly is a suitable way for people who want to have kids. We've accepted there is a loss of this and that, and we've accepted some things in society broadly. Not everyone likes it, but most of us accept that this is true. So we've accepted that now we put cigarettes behind plastic containers and high taxation. We accept certain things. And so we just need to debate non-hysterically within society. What are we willing to lose? And you got to be honest about it. I think you got to be honest about it. What are you willing to lose to be healthier as a society? Questions? So,
related to that, I'm glad to see that you have the Van der Linden brothers on your slideshow. I'm not interested about this.
UPFs?
Yeah, well, the third age of eating is really kind of like the hypothesis that he makes, in the sense that we now live in a food system that is designed for profit, and in that way is designed to make you eat as much as possible, as fast as possible, of ingredients that are designed to be as cheap as possible, without really having much consideration for how healthy or sustainable they are. What do you think might be the impact of that food system of a widespread availability
of the drugs?
Something like the GL2 drugs?
So people have been doing, so I don't have any of the graphs here, but people have been modeling it. I've spoken to people within the insurance and investment world. And yeah, there are companies which make primarily these ultra-processed foods. Once again, we can debate their utility of the term, but nonetheless, it all depends on the penetrance. Okay, at the moment, I wouldn't say neither here nor there. I think they are actually a concern. The moment we get to the 15 quid a month thing, and we actually get a situation where everyone who needs it can get it, it will have an impact. Now, here's the thing. Here's the thing. I do think that there is a opportunity here. So broadly speaking, most of us, I think anyway, spend a static amount on food a month, broadly speaking. As we get older and you make more money, you still tend to spend more on food, but you don't eat. Okay, maybe I eat too much food, but nonetheless, you eat. But there's a static rise of food. Now, when we end up taking these drugs will actually make you eat less. It won't improve your diet. It won't. Okay, so we need to then still improve your diet. And so I think there is an opportunity here for food companies, rather than to fear. And what are you going to do? Make it even worse for you? Because the problem is, once you're on these drugs, you just will eat less, period. You will eat less, period. It doesn't matter what they dangle in front of your face. What happens, however, is we know that healthier foods tends to be slightly more expensive for any number of different reasons. So can they improve the quality of their food? Instead of, so people still spend roughly the same amount of money, but actually get better quality food in order to do that. I think the take that the food systems are all in it for profit, but that's true, isn't that the whole purpose of a business? I never understood that. I think we can't, not never understood that. I don't think we can blame a company, pharma or food or otherwise, for trying to get people to make more money, because to try and make more money because that's the whole purpose of a business. I think what we have to do is to put the incentives in place so that they don't say you have to be more responsible. Don't say, that you have to voluntarily make it. But that's a load of, it's very naive. I think what most of the people that I've spoken to who work within the food industry say, give us the dimensions of the pitch. Okay, the pitch are here, the rules are here. As long as everyone has to play in those dimensions, they'll take it to the edge of legality and keep it there, but so will everyone else. And so what we need are to just draw the rules, whatever the rules may be. You need a minimum amount of protein, you need a minimum amount of fiber, whatever, okay? That it's empirical. We can actually draw these things. The moment you put it out there, and actually Coca-Cola, if they want to trade in the UK and have to then fit within those rules, they'll fit within those rules. And if they've designed it for the UK, they may as well just roll it out in the States, okay? That may be naive, but I think that's going to be the answer. I think we need to put the right incentives in place. We need to interact with them to say that actually we still need healthier food even when on the drugs. But more crucially, really good rules that everyone follow, and don't leave it to personal responsibility or some outdated thinking about societal responsibility for a company whose job is to make money. That would be my view. Yep.
I totally agree with that point. And I think in our economy, in our political economy, companies exist to make money, whether they're in food or whatever.
Or anything else, yeah.
Although it feels a bit more visceral when they're marketing food to children, that they should have some form of social licensing. What I don't think fits within that is intentionally funding research that is misleading. Having, in the case of Coca-Cola, having 150 scientists on their books, pumping out research that shows that it's individual responsibility and it's lack of exercise, and it's nothing to do with their products, which are absolutely fine. And, that's where it breaks down. But I think it's not necessarily, you're right, it's not necessarily the fault of the company that just exists within the reality. It's in my mind, it's a failure of regulation, it's a failure of kind of social parameters.
So it's rules. Because
Yes,
I think, because ultimately it's only going to work if you make it a rule. If you say it's your social responsibility, they'll give you the lovely blah blah, but they won't do it. And so I think we need to therefore set better rules and better incentives so that a scientist would look. I get funding from drug companies, from pharma companies to find out how their drug works, for example. Okay, but I declare it, I what have you. And I don't think it's a bad thing. There's some people who call me a drug shill. I'm just trying to figure out how these things work. I think the same thing should be possible for food, okay? Because ultimately we still need to interact with them. They make our food, we have to interact with them. But can we do it? Can we do it transparently, which is absolutely crucial? But can we do it and still be sciencey? Can we not be influenced by them? And I think that is a more complex question. The The scientist working with the company question, I think, is more complex because I think there's a huge gray area between, look, I just want to know, something about whether or not artificial sweeteners are good or bad for you or blah, 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 versus saying that trying to find any nook and cranny to say that actually, it's like, for example, Coca-Cola advertises for the World Cup or the Olympics or something like that, it's just because sports washing, exactly that. But that can be done by rules, I think. But yes, absolutely. Questions? So.
Yeah. So maybe going back to, you said when you were like advising or talking to the shadow government, shadow health team, West Street and Co. What did you talk about? What like advice did you give them for the kind of policies you wanted to see? Because the whole thing's kind of like a balancing act between, how much does the government spend on each one of these big blocks up there? How much do they spend on trying to get people to change behaviour? How much do they spend on, putting these drugs on the NHS at the risk of maybe even making the problem worse? People just see the drugs like, okay, they're there, I can just eat even more now and then I get it on the NHS. Or even on policy behind, should we put like bariatric surgery, which is like, I don't know, one of the only effective methods for more extreme cases on the NHS as well. Like, what kind of policies did you advise?
So what was rather depressing? So I said pretty much exactly what I told you, because this is my opinion and my belief. And what happened is the people working on a policy and behavior pretty much said the same thing. We need to make sure that advertisements are, particularly to children, because unhealthy children make unhealthy adults. That's the primary reason. That should be really tightly regulated. Things like that. Okay, all of the things. But I'll come back to each of those. Well, let me answer in a slightly oblique fashion. What we left, because at the time, 2022, end of 2022, I mean, we still have a cost of living crisis, but at the time, the energy crisis was really awful at the time, I think, and what we got was we can't make food more expensive. Fine, fair enough. That's one thing they said, because that's not a vote winner. And we can't use the word obesity because it is negative and threatens to alienate people. So what their take on the whole was that actually, we went around in circles a couple of times, is that what we will say is we will worry about children's health, because who argues against children's health? Okay, and so that's fine. And their argument is that surely if you are, as a family, are trying to improve your child's health, you, as a byproduct, improve the health of your whole family, because you typically will make food that's healthier for the entire family. So, okay, fine. So this is improving children's health without mentioning the word obesity. Okay, depressing. Second, you can't make food more expensive overtly. Okay, so how do you tackle that? I says, okay, but you can sort of say that it's gonna, anyway, they didn't listen to me there. And so what they said was, we can say that we need more sustainable diets. Now, as it turns out, because then you think about it from an environmental perspective, now, as it turns out, more sustainable diets tend to be diets higher and have more plants. And ultimately, if you're eating more plants, that's going to be healthier for you anyway, and that's going to be a good thing. And by definition, if you're eating plants, you're eating less of the highly processed stuff. And so that was their take. That take was, so they walked away out. So, okay, what we're going to do is we'll make sure we focus on child health and talk about sustainable diets. After half a day of banging them about that. So that was what they got out of it. Let's see what will happen. The drugs were not quite as, I mean, it was already coming in terms of their effect, but they're now really far more ubiquitous, particularly since they've all been approved. Making them available is not jumping around here. And I'll go to the drugs in a second. What was the other point? So that was what I got from it. It got me slightly depressed because I still feel, no, I'm not trying to weight shame, weight stigma anybody, but you need to admit and say the word out the problem to fix the problem. And we have to say, well, there is an issue with obesity without it being a pejorative term. You're just describing an issue. Why is it a problem? And we need to solve it. They found that to be politically inexpedient as far as trying to win votes. So that was what they actually got. Discussed many things. I forgot exactly, but broadly, all the things that you thought that we might have discussed, we discussed. But that was their takeaway when they actually finished that meeting. The drugs are an interesting thing, because then there's the question of why people are taking it privately. Now, even here at the CUH, Cambridge University Hospital, now there are people there are the doctors, obviously, and people who do the prescription, but then there are people that control the tabs, money tabs, about what. These are drugs that are approved by NICE. So this is not an approval situation, but they have a limit to the number that these drugs can be set out, because they're afraid that if they turn on the taps, then too much money is spent. As I said, it's a short-term problem. But the guy, and it is a guy, okay, controlling the taps, calls these drugs Gucci drugs. Now, that's exactly what this is what my colleague told me. And that comes with all of the baggage that you might imagine what he thinks of these drugs. Now, this guy, of course, is, upper middle class, posh person, and very lean. Okay, he goes skiing. Yes, wonderful. All of the above, and calling these things Gucci drugs, and that is unhelpful. But to state the and I think that's part of the problem. I do think the medical community, by and large, are still part of the problem. I try and talk to, obviously, at student level. I speak to them, and but the more old school, the more chronologically challenged individuals are still difficult to get through. Sorry, that wasn't what you asked. But back to the question of what you asked. Those were the two slightly depressing takeaways that they got from a full half day of getting what I thought some quite smart people. I'm giving them some really good pieces of public health evidence-based. I want to public health evidence. I think you had your hand up.
If we could, should we give these fat kids like Manjaro and stuff?
I think children is always very tricky. Do I see it happening in adolescence? Yes, I do. Probably pretty soon, because there have already been studies showing that roughly around 14 to 15 age, post-puberty largely, okay, going into that where it's been effective. Look, the kids didn't even get the COVID vaccine. So I think it is injecting things into kids, understandably, perfectly correctly, is something that people don't tend to do unless it's very, very trialed. I would like to think that we need to understand far more about the longer term. So two things. As an adult, so fully developed, what happens long term, we're getting a better idea of that. We'll get more ideas, more things. We need to understand that in more detail. Adolescence, there's still growth spurts, there's still things, there are more hormones involved. We need to understand that interaction, because we're injecting more hormones into them. We need to understand that interaction. What happens pre-puberty as life is changing at the fastest rate that is ever going to change? I think we need to be very, very careful. Do I see it if it's fully safe and fully tested that they'll do it? Yeah, I can see it, because currently we do give our kids paracetamol, right? It's interesting. Paracetamol is an interesting analogy, because we understand that if I took a whole jar of paracetamol, I could kill myself. Okay, so it's something which you technically could kill yourself with if you OD on paracetamol, but yet I can walk into Tesco's and buy enough paracetamol to kill myself. Okay, broadly speaking. But we understand, because now it's so ingrained societally, I can't take more than 6 tablets, or is it 8 tablets a day, whatever the situation, and we medicate ourselves when we have a fever and when we have these things. We give it to our kids. We give our kids Calpol, okay, smaller dose and what have you. So if we can get to the stage where we understand these drugs, I'm skeptical about that, but if we do get to the stage where they can become paracetamol, because we actually understand that, then I see no reason we can do it. But we have to be very, very, very careful with kids. And I think there are a lot more levers with kids, because so one of the things with kids, just for example, we're talking about free school meals. I think free school meals shouldn't be means tested, particularly primary school. I think when you don't get in the moment you're in a high school, you got an allowance. You got money. Okay, just whatever. Then that's a very different thing. But certainly nursery to primary school, I do think that non-means tested, there should be money set aside, and everyone should not have to pay for their meals in school at all. Now that won't fix everything, but that would fix quite a lot of things. And then what you can at the moment you can say, well, they're crap at the moment, the meals. Yeah, well, make them not crap. Okay, put some barriers, around making sure the food is good and what have you. We have a lot more levers that we have not used yet for children because we can control their environment. School, they have to go to school. That is an environment we can control, and so more levers yet. Adults we're lost cause. So that's my opinion about what I think should happen. So,
going back to the sort of genetics, are there any sort of genetic disorders that you can pinpoint get obesity from more than others in a hormonal sense?
Yes. So, but they all, interestingly enough, the genes that end up causing, or at least having a real big driver for obesity, sit within. So your brain needs to know broadly two pieces of information to influence your food intake. Okay, so leaving aside, there's internal information. There's external information as well. But internally, hormonally, your brain needs to know your long-term energy stores, how much fat you have, because that's how long you last in a while without any food. And it needs to understand what you're currently eating and what you've just eaten. And these are going to come from your gut, your gastrointestinal tract. So two completely separate pathways: the gut hormone signaling pathway, which is what these drugs are weaponized and used. But that is not where the genes for the severe obesity that we have found lie. They all lie within the fat sensing pathway. And so there are a number of genes within the central fat sensing pathway that, when mutated, cause severe obesity. Some are vanishingly rare, so actually won't have any.
Many genes.
How many genes?
Many. It's like MEN1, multiple
MEN1.
endocrine neoplasia type 1.
That must be a rare thing. I don't think it's a common cause. So that's a rare.
An endocrine system.
Yeah, exactly. So no, there are going to be rare causes, but that's a very different question, right? Because if you've got an genetic endocrine disorder, you can't fix all of them, but you can fix a lot of them. Because particularly if it's hormonal, you can replace the hormone. If it's a receptor, you can do the stuff. And particularly, so that is a very different, and these rare conditions I'm talking about have very bespoke ways of actually dealing with them, as opposed to the broader context of obesity. But yes, they are. That's what we study. We study genetics of rare, severe causes of childhood obesity in particular. Yep.
I'm wondering, what do you think about the risk of developing nutritional deficiencies from taking weight loss drugs? So because you're eating less, you end up with like deficiencies in calcium and vitamin C, that kind of thing.
So the main issue with that is it doesn't improve your diet. So if you have a diet of chips and Oreos, okay, and so therefore you eat too much of it, so therefore have obesity, all the drugs will do is stop you eating, is to eat less chips and Oreos. Now the problem is you've probably been eating one has probably been eating sort of enough chips and Oreos to pick up enough micronutrients. There are actually quite a lot of micronutrients even in crap that we eat, okay? Like sadly, or not sadly, okay? Luckily, actually, it's probably more the term. The problem is, however, if it makes you eat less, I'm gonna give you an example. I'll admit it. So I put you don't know him, so I can say, my son, okay? He's 23 now. And so he went to uni and then suddenly, he gained a lot of weight, okay? The freshers 14, freshers 30. I don't know how much he gained, a lot of weight. And so I ended up putting in a Monjaro, which is tirzepatide. He's been on it for now his third month, and he has lost nearly 2 stone. Okay, in the first thing. It's just to observe it. Terrible for a father to say, but we gave it to him just in the new year to observe it as a scientist. But in answer to your question, we were walking in Wales. Okay, he goes to University of Wales, so we spent New Year over there and then dropping back in New Year. And we were doing some walk, and And he loves his food, as you might imagine. But what happened was, we got him, he says, what have you eaten today? He says, I forgot. He says, I had a double decker in the morning and then didn't feel hungry till dinner. That is not the solution, right? And that's what happens. What happens is if you don't think, and then we ended up sitting down and says, look, what you've got to do is when you're, now you've got to think harder about it, because normally we're driven by whatever. You've got to think harder about eating. So yes, the risk is real, particularly if you've only had a double decker for the day. You will lose weight, but at some point you'll run out of the minerals and fiber and protein that you need to actually keep your body right. It's real. So I think that these drugs, when they're prescribed on the NHS, this is hardly an intervention. You're given the drug, but you're given a leaflet, okay, about how to eat healthily. I think we need to be more, and if you take it privately, you don't get anything at all. So I aside from the drug. So I do think that there needs to be a understanding that these drugs cannot be deployed by itself. The other thing, okay, so that's that. We need to improve our diets. These drugs won't improve our diets, so we have to think hard about it. I did an event for the fitness industry, Elevate. So it's a place full of people with tight t-shirts and looking very buff, not me. And so it was like at the London Excel, zillions of people were there. Okay? And so I went there and so it was a public-facing event to the fitness industry who I don't normally speak to. And it was called Gym or Jab. Now, come up with a title. It's a good title. The answer is gym and jab, because the other problem mixed in with the potential for malnutrition, okay, let's use the term, when you have rapid weight loss, it doesn't matter. I don't think it's specific to these drugs. When you have rapid weight loss, you tend to lose 50% muscle, 50% fat, and no one, lean mass. None of us signed up to lose lean mass. Okay, that's just nothing. Unless you actually exercise while you're taking the drug to mitigate against the loss. You'll still lose some of it, but if you exercise at the same time, you mitigate against the loss. So these drugs in of itself will not solve the problem of the obesity. It will make you lose weight, but you could be malnourished, you could lose muscle mass, all bad things. And so I think these things cannot be deployed independently. They have to be deployed with a dietary intervention, a proper intervention, and probably an exercise plan. Yep.
If you lose weight dramatically, you'll have lots of floating about skin.
There's that as well. There's that. There is a. There's a cosmetic thing. The NHS won't do it. And it's true. I think the younger you are, the more plastic your skin, and so you do it. But you're right. It is because there's some people losing a hell of a lot of weight. The average weight loss for the people doing it, you won't get too much of the skin. But there are some people who are losing, 5 stone in a year. You'll get skin, and you're right. The NHS won't cover because it's a cosmetic surgery, rightly or wrongly. Okay, but they won't do it. That's true. Questions? Yes.
How easy is it to obtain the drugs online, and how do you think there should be prevention about, I don't know, developing it as an eating disorder if it's available for younger teenagers?
So we'll tackle the second first. In terms of the eating disorder, it's a real and present danger. Eating disorders are. I think we can prevent the eating disorders by making sure that only the people that need the drug get the drug. And the only way to do that is if the physician has line of sight with the person in front of you, right? Because yes, eating disorders are complex. I'm not only talking about anorexia. Clearly, you can have eating disorders without the overt signs of something like that. But if you are a clinician or have something, you should be able to at least see flags, okay, for that. And at the moment, I'll give you the truthful answers. My son is taking it privately. Right now, we're doing it where he now has Zoom consultations and everything is there. But the first month he was there, okay, a friend of mine was saying that this seems a reputable pharmacy, etc., etc. So we went to it, and literally all he did was he had to take a picture of himself and actually send it in, And yes, he had to put his NHS number there, but the picture of himself, and like literally he did it. His mate, they were about to go out to the movies or something, right? This was just around Christmas time. And I says, have you sorted this out? And 20s had not sorted it out. So finally, so he sorted it out. And literally at the dining table, he took a picture, he's like, and then sent it while waiting for his friend to arrive, and he says it's ordered. I says, when? He says, just now. Scarily easily. I think the government has tightened it up slightly, where I think you do need now to zoom rather than just taking a picture. I don't think that still is enough to be fair. Yes, eating disorders are a real and present danger. We have to, and it's a real and present danger for a couple of different reasons. First, to the person with the eating disorder getting the drug, it's could kill them. So that's obviously a key reason. But actually, these are drugs that have the potential to, if used correctly, to help a lot of people. The problem is if a drug company gets some bad press because suddenly you get a bunch of kids dying because they got the drugs because something like that, and that bad press that the drug companies got to get it out or something and put up, then suddenly you then withdraw really quite things that, if used correctly, can help a lot of different people. And so I think for any number of different reasons, key amongst that we want to keep people with eating disorders safe, okay, is that we want to make sure that these drugs, we got to get a grip. The drugs have got their drugs, they're powerful drugs. They got to be treated, given, assessed, and provided access to light drugs. And questions? What's happening? But you and then you again.
Yes. Follow up on I'm interested in the long-term effects of drugs. So if you live in a food farm and you have predisposition to obesity, you're going to have to take these drugs for life, really. I mean, as soon as you stop taking them, you will again.
Correct.
Do we have a good understanding of what endocrinologically that does to a person?
So these drugs have been used for 20 years in some form or other. For the vast majority of time, bar the last 5, they were used as once daily injections. And the side effects, aside from the ones we know, pukiness, diarrhea, because it's the tube, it tends to affect the feed-to-poop tube. Okay, we don't think that there are any significant long-term for the once daily injections over the decade to decade and a half. It is true that with a once weekly injection, you have a different kinetics. Okay, so the stuff is in, and so we will need to know more. The answer is we will need to know more as more and more people take it. Also, rarer side effects will start to emerge, and we need to understand them. So that's why it has to be a prescription. We don't know what the super long-term outlook is yet, and we'll find out. Now, in terms of staying on it forever, I don't think that at least from my understanding of what the drug companies are now testing, is they're not foreseeing that everyone stays on it forever at the current dose, the people that take it. And a lot of companies are now testing the maintenance dose. So one of the companies, which I've just got to declare interest from Amgen, I got some grant funding from them to work on how the drug works, not whether it works, because it's already in trials, but how the drugs actually work, is a once monthly injection. Okay, and they're testing the once every 2 months injection. So we're looking at 12 to 6 injections, at the 6 to 12 injections at the moment a year, and you're losing about 20% of your body weight. Now, so you can imagine, so once again, I think this is the likely outcome, and they're testing it at the moment, and we'll see what actually really happens. But I think the likely outcome is we will get to a stage where there is a weight loss stage of it, depending on the degree, be it 6 months to 2 years, okay? Roughly speaking, let's talk about that. So you end up losing 15, 20, 25, 30% of your body weight, whatever you need to go to actually get to your quote unquote healthier range, okay? And then you hit a maintenance dose, where if you're talking about these, they're talking potentially once every 6 months, you go for a together with your flu vaccine or what have you, you might go and get a top-up dose. I think that's the kind of scenario is the most likely. There are going to be some people who are more severely obese that will need something different, but that is at the moment what is being mooted as long as the testing works out. Weight loss and then some kind of maintenance regime, which is less scary sounding than having to inject yourself with high dose, for the rest of your life. But for a lot of people, it will be a long-term solution rather than a short-term solution, unless we fix the environment. Because if you fix the environment, there's still going to be some people who need it for a super long-term solution. I think for some people, but for a lot of us, if the chocolate bar wasn't there, I'm not going to buy the chocolate bar, right? Because you just happen to pick it up because you went to BP to get diesel, and oh, chocolate bar, But if that wasn't there, and so that's the level of your what to pick, then you won't do it. So I think maintenance dose plus some cojones to actually make the policy changes we need to actually improve that situation. One last question. Yep.
What about GLP-1 agonists affecting reward pathways? So how would you be able to put that in place to ensure that people still exercise and stuff? Because there's reward pathways for that as well. So how would you ensure that people were actually trying to maintain that muscle mass because they're not motivated to?
That's an excellent question. So just do some background for those of you who don't know. As more and more people take it, more and more side effects have emerged. The side effects can be positive or negative, and this happens to be, well, actually, there are negatives and positives to the side effects. The negative effect is that there are now rare situations where people have reported suicidal ideation from taking these drugs. They're super rare, but they're there. It's important to understand. But on the flip side, and I think it's part of the same biology of the system, is that people are beginning to realize that if I'm trying to quit smoking or quit drinking because I'm an alcoholic or drugs of abuse, that if you're on the drugs, it's on these GLP-1s, it's far easier to quit it. Okay, mechanism-wise, okay, we don't know the mechanism. What do I think is happening? I think what is happening is it takes the top off. It makes you feel fuller. A lot of people, for most of us, eating feels nice. Beyond actually filling up, it feels nice. And anything that feels nice, there's different pathways, but it gets to roughly the same part of the brain, the hedonic region of the brain. And so I think what happens is because it takes the top off the reward, it makes it easier for you to eat less because you're fuller. It also makes it easier for you to quit smoking because, you know what? I'm not enjoying this as much as I used to. It's the interesting thing about the exercise. I hadn't thought about that. But there could be different motivation actually underlying that, because then, so you got to put the right incentives in place, right? So if there is a way of marking that, listen, do you really want to lose lean mass? Are you able? So I think the way to get past is not to rely on the reward element for the exercise, but to make sure the incentives to explain why keeping your muscle there is better for you long term, for health and stuff, and things like that. But the reward thing is a very interesting thing. The other interesting thing, and this is my final thought, as these side effects, there's a danger this thing suddenly becomes this silver bullet. But I don't think it is. But I think these are real biological effects of these drugs. Is that it has a remarkable effect on slowing down the progression of Alzheimer's. How? I mean, so this being tested at the moment. We within the field, we think actually that it's going to be some anti-inflammatory effect of these GLP-1s then causing, and what happens is there is an inflammation part to Alzheimer's that is actually dampening down, and as a result of this dampening down, it's actually slowing. It doesn't cure Alzheimer's, okay, but I think there is good evidence now, and drug companies are definitely testing it for that.
The Alzheimer's also be related to, I suppose there's a relationship between the amount of fat in the brain, relating to Alzheimer's. Is that the fat somehow causing the inflammation, or would it be a separate mechanism?
That's an interesting question, because I don't think, like with cancer, oddly enough, I told you that obesity increases risk for certain cancers, not all cancers, and increases risk for Alzheimer's for certain people. Mechanistically, no idea why. There is, yes, you don't get a fat. There is actually quite a lot of fat in your brain because of the myelination and everything like that. It's really quite a fatty tissue anyway. The fat you're not going to get a fat brain, but you will get circulating more free fatty acids or nephers or something like that could actually penetrate at least the base of the brain going in, which could cause some issues. But that is not where the Alzheimer's is having the problem. The Alzheimer's issues tend to be deeper in there. So from first principles, I don't think it's because of excess fat, dietary fat, that is causing the issue. It's very different from something else like breast cancer, which is it's a fat. It's either largely a fat tissue, or if we're looking at pancreatic cancer, where you can have infiltration of fat. Now that is a very different mechanism, but that doesn't happen to the brain. So I don't think it's that.
Sorry,
a mechanistic,
excuse me.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
This one's booked from
Oh.
6:15.
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
that's
so
Go ahead.
we need to
No worries.
clear it.
Thank you very much for clearing it. Thank you. It's been a pleasure to speak to you guys. Thank you.